So let's move to the agenda. Apologies. I have apologies from Craig and from Grant. Those are the only apologies. Yep, I move that those apologies be accepted. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Neil. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no, that's carried. Then we have the confirmation of the policy and planning minutes of the 30th of April 2024. Any issues with the accuracy of those minutes? No. Any matters arising from those minutes people want to raise? Yes, Lee.
Yeah, I've got a comment on the minutes, and I think I've complained before. I've certainly complained in our council meeting. To quote Winston Peters, if the meeting minutes were a swimsuit, there'd be a G-string. So
quite acceptable.
When I'm trying to articulate issues to my council around things that might affect them, the meeting minutes are next to useless. And the example of that was when we discussed the water take issues, and some of the verbal feedback from officers added additional information to the report, and there's no record of that. So I just wonder why the minutes are so brief, because some of that context would be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, I can just, I might pass over to Mike just in terms of the historical approach council, and then I can add some comments.
So, Chair, we of course are guided here by local government law and standing orders, which clearly note that minutes are to be a record of those that attend the meeting, those that discuss the meeting, and the decisions that are made. It's not a form. Sorry, Benita, I haven't got my microphone on. So under local government law and standing orders, minutes are to be a record of who's there, what's discussed, and the decisions made, the items covered and the decisions made. It is not a verbatim record of matters that were discussed. That's covered by the agenda items and the rest of it. So we are in compliance with standard local government practice, but I am aware that councils do go to a lot more depth in their minutes.
Yeah, and my perspective is we've got a really small governance team here, and we're trying to keep a lid on cost control as much as we can. So it's about finding that balance between, as Mike said, recording the actions of the meeting, but also the load we carry. And historically, we've always just recorded actions, and when specifically people have asked for things to be minuted, we've added that in. I think if you make the line to adding more information, you need to know you do it really, really well, because there's nothing worse than having badly written minutes. So that's the approach we've taken as a council, and the reasons why. Yeah,
Madam Chair, if we, shall we say, go to this meeting, we have all the information at this meeting about what we're going to discuss, the papers and everything. And then next meeting, what we're doing is we put out the resolution of what we've actually decided. We don't need the commentary, but we've decided. So surely if there's a shortage of information, all you have to really do is refer yourself back to the notes from the previous meeting and use those together with what's been done as the minutes to produce something that's completely or reasonably explainable to anybody.
Yeah, I see it's with South Taranaki District Council. I know that you do have very comprehensive minutes where you record who asked a question, what they asked, what was the response, and those kind of things. So it is a much higher level of detail.
And because there's always quite a lot more detail, or not quite a lot, but in some cases there is salient detail added by the officers at the meeting that isn't in the report in response to questions that we ask. Yeah. And that salient information isn't recorded. Yeah. But anyway, I can see that.
The point is, and I've got to be hesitant because I'm an acting chair in this role, and it's the chair of the committees, how they decide they want to record those things.
Do your councillors
noting the wider council?
Well, I do.
I know you do.
I don't know whether the rest of them do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would say there's anyone around this committee table can ask for something to be recorded in the minutes if it's really important to them that they've asked a certain question or they've voted a certain way and those kind of things. afterwards if you really want to record it. So, and I know we are live streaming now, so that's one more step in terms of what we're discussing being more available. Okay.
And Chair, to that point, at the risk of extending the conversation, the trial of live streaming for the first 6 months, the council's resolution was to readdress whether we then record and publish the meetings. And if we make that step in 6 months' time, then that would provide additional clarity about what was discussed at the meeting.
Yeah, you can't get a better record. In fact, that's probably the most efficient way to record meetings, the actual live stream. But yeah, as I said, council will take a decision in 6 months. Okay, so we have the recommendations on page 3 to confirm these minutes and note the recommendations. Thank you, Susan, and a seconder. Thank you, Neil. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no, that's carried. Right, we move to tab 4, which is the 11th of June Policy and Planning Committee meeting items. So here we have the entire pack that went to the Policy and Planning Committee that didn't meet quorum, but we did have a workshop in that sense. So the proposal is to move the recommendations as one.
So I'll move.
Sorry, I've been very bad at not following my script. Do I need to? Is there any officer who wants to speak to this? No, it's pretty straightforward. As I said, we had a workshop, we discussed everything.
I'll also move, Madam Chairman.
Great. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Donna. All those in favour say
Are
aye.
you there?
No, but
Seconding, you don't need to.
But whereas in she's
I've
passing
read
the
it.
recommendations in the paper today, so
Right.
as long as she's comfortable with that. That's okay. So Donna's happy to second.
if they want.
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no, that's correct. And then we go past about 200 pages and onto tab 5, which is the freshwater implementation update for July 2024. So I'll hand over to Lisa.
Yes. You've just bypassed it. Did you want to have some input?
This is just the standing item that I bring to each PMP, just to provide you all an update of the work that we've been hopefully that's better.
Yeah.
Cool. This is the standing item update that I bring to PMP every session to give you an overview of what we've been working on from the freshwater perspective over the last 6 weeks and look ahead to what's coming up over the next 6 weeks. So just to recap, I'll take it as read, but I guess a few key things. This really focuses on the consultation that we've been out there doing. We're well into that 8-week consultation period. We have got 2 weeks left of that consultation period. The front part of that consultation period focused heavily on all of our community meetings, getting out there and talking to our community about the various proposals that we've got in play at the moment for freshwater. Had really good attendance across those community meetings. We had 549 people turn up across them all. We've had, I've just checked with Charles this morning, we've now had 81 surveys come in as well. And we've had some really good engagement, I guess, across social media and people clicking into our website and looking at the various documentation that's up there for people. So we've also just in the past week completed our special interest group workshops, where we held 4 of those workshops last week. In that workshop, we posed some more in-depth questions and conversations that we'd like to get from those special interest groups. And so hopefully some of those conversations will flow onto some bespoke submissions, which I'm sure a lot of those interest groups will actually be putting in over the next couple of weeks as well. And over the next 2 weeks going forward, we've got a series of marae based discussions with our iwi. We're just trying to finalise some time with Te Atiawa at this point in time, but everybody else has got sessions scheduled over the next couple of weeks. All of those sessions in working with the iwi pro taiao have been comfortable with us running a similar kind of format in terms of having all of our policy and science staff at those discussions for whānau to talk to us about any of the issues that they wish to delve into in more detail. And then we also have a follow-up session with iwi pro taiao particularly as well to kind of delve into the policy response that each of iwi's pro taiao may wish to feed in additional to those conversations at the marae. So that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. Upon reflection, I think the feedback we have had has been really good, high quality. It's given us some really good direction around things we might need to go back and have another look at, some nuance in our policy framework that perhaps we hadn't anticipated may have come through from our community. So we are getting some really good direction from that. So we'll, over the next few weeks, be working on pulling all of that analysis together. We'll bring a report back to the PMP committee once we've done that, which will summarise everything we've heard and kind of give you guys a little bit of a direction as to where we think we need to head from there onwards. So happy to have any questions or queries on any of that.
Before we get into questions, I just want to acknowledge the phenomenal work of those drop-in sessions. I went to a number of them and there were just heaps of TRC people there, heaps of people, great engagement, like some of the best consultation I've experienced on this council or any council engagement I've been to. So just want to say a huge namahi to the council team for all the work they've put in, and the consultation is still open. So if you know anyone who hasn't done the survey and wants to put in a submission, they have till the 2nd of August. Yes. Yeah. So I'll let you to the floor. Neil.
Yeah, just perhaps, Madam Chair, just commenting briefly what you said, as well as the fact that you got a tremendous number of people going. And I think in this day of apathy, that was a magnificent achievement. And the fact that everybody in all these areas knew at least that the thing was on. And the other thing, if you went to those meetings, you began to see that there had been a different attitude, which was that the people were actually working with staff. There was no final decisions, obviously, or anything like that, but everybody was explaining to everybody else and developing a community relationship, which is what we really want to see here, where we're cooperating together to get an answer, rather than more or less them seeing us as a directional agency. And I think, again, it's another congratulations, not only on the demeanour and the way in which it was conducted, the whole thing of putting the posters up and the coach, it's simple enough for a lot of people to understand. So I think that really was very positive. And another thing just mentioning is the fact that right down the south of Taranaki, there was a real engagement with regional council staff in numbers. And there was always this feeling way down there that they're sort of far from the empire's heart, you might say. And as such, I think you began to also made them feel part of Taranaki genuinely, which was something that was well worth doing.
Yeah. And I also want to thank everyone around this table, particularly Federated Farmers and Donna as well, and Don and Neil for promoting it to their members to come and attend, because there was a really good farmer turnout as well, which is really important because I think the impact of it. Great.
Just for me, just like to acknowledge the support provided by Tile to be able to help organise these events. So not only especially for Ngāti Mutu, Ngāti Tama, not only is the 2nd of August one, but there's one next week, just to help get people on board and help them understand what it is that the 2nd of August is going to discuss, so they can have better input and more informative for the day.
And Benita, see you hand up.
Kia ora, Lisa. Well done to you and your team. Fantastic effort and fantastic results. So I'm sure that the information will be critical in helping us formulate plans moving forward. I'm also just wanted to mihi to everyone, our Potai, our team, our iwi reps and the staff for making sure that we're getting out to marae and getting out to communities whose safe space is the marae. Thanks for that. That's really critical. And can I just ask whoever's going into those spaces to please mihi on my behalf and pass on my apologies. Obviously, I'd be there if I could, but just again, a thanks all round to those who are putting in the effort to make sure our people are part of the conversation and taking us forward into the future. Kia ora tātou.
Great. And I'll just say to the committee, those dates are on page 318. So if anybody wants to attend, just get in contact with the team, because it's always an open invitation for councillors to attend anything, or any committee members as well.
So through you, Madam Chair, it's extremely important for council staff to go out and experience these matters as well, and it's part of their development as scientists and policy analysts, to front their thoughts and to receive feedback from the community. So, and in fact, we've seen some members of staff who may not have been that confident at the start to be a lot more confident now, and so that's also important in terms of the business we run.
Any further questions or comments? Yeah.
I'd just like to log a small concern, and that as I did have some feedback from some of my members that they felt that the decisions had already been made and there was no room for feedback, which I felt was a real shame. And I don't know how we fix that going forward, if there's a way to make the questions more open or somehow to kind of open the conversation. So I feel there's still a part of the farming community that feels a bit backed into the corner. And I don't know how to address that going forward, but I did just want to raise that.
Yeah, through you, I can happily respond to that. I guess we did think really carefully about how we were posing questions, and I think we did get a lot of people who weren't, necessarily comfortable in saying whether they supported something or not, but were happy to have a conversation with staff, and those comments were then written down. So I would say that there was definitely given the opportunity for people to say if they didn't feel like they were able to participate in that their comments were, they were given every opportunity, I suppose, to write whatever comment they felt they wanted to make at that time on a particular topic. And, we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of post-it notes that support that kind of conversation, that's giving the nuance that might not be, I didn't want to say yes or no, but I wanted to provide this comment. And so we've collected that as well. We are at a very early stage of, I guess, warming up some of these policy directions. So there is we've got another, 12 months of continued policy development. There'll be some more conversations as well. So plenty of opportunity for people to continue to be involved. I wouldn't say that we've made clear decisions on many things at all yet at this point in time. And that was the opportunity to tell the direction we were heading.
And can I just add, this is what, the third or fourth consultation we've done?
Yep.
And having done a few council consultations, so at some point you have to go out with some proposals for people to react to. And you have to, if you don't have a preferred option, or you put your foot down on what you think could be an option, then people accuse you of hiding things or having hidden agendas. So you kind of, there's a no-win situation. If you try and keep it open, then people think you've got a hidden agenda. If you try and do a recommended option, then you get criticised the other way. So it's this very careful balance. And I also note that everything came through this committee, of which we're one of the very few committees that have a federated farmers rep on. So it is trying to get that engagement all the way through. So that is a shame that people thought that, but hopefully you can pass those messages back, that it is still a stage of consultation and we've got multiple consultations going forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I did, and I also encouraged those people just to give feedback in the way that was most appropriate to them. So if it wasn't to answer the question that was directly posed, then just to say what it is that they felt, and that was what I have continued to do.
Yeah.
And just to note, of course, that if you recall at the time when this began, there was some press statements or press articles that were made reporting on this very committee, which had totally misinformed the situation. And as such, if I had just read that and then gone to the meeting, maybe I'd have gone with a preconceived notice. And it again goes back to the point that there are people in the press sometimes who want to sell newspapers and not to get the facts.
Yeah. Okay, any further questions? Yes, Donna.
Just some comments really. I just felt a week out was, from just for next time, I think a week's, we need to make it more than a week out that people find out about these meetings. I mean, I'd been letting people know, but the publicity only started. I just felt it could have been earlier. But the other one was just that we had these, because I did it, so most of the feedback I had was good, but just one person actually walked out because she felt she couldn't, because when you've got two people in front of those boards and that there was exclusion maybe. But I just wondered, for next time you're going to have bigger numbers and, just thinking about how you're going to do the presentation meeting. Yeah.
Okay. If I can just respond to that as well, through you, Chair, we did get, all of those, I guess, are valid concerns. They're probably always going to be things that will occur in a consultation period. You're not always going to keep absolutely everybody happy in that process, but we did also throughout the process get a lot of positive feedback from people around the style of consultation that we were doing, because people did feel like they were able to engage with the material at a pace that suited them. If they didn't have an interest in a particular topic, they didn't spend their time talking to staff on that. They could kind of engage on the bits that they were. I do, so sometimes in some of those busier sessions when we had, 60 people in the room at the start of it, it was hard to get around to all of the conversations, but we had people staying for the whole 2 hours in some instances and 3 hours just to be able to talk to all staff.
Like most was positive. I just thought for next time, maybe it's something to think about because it could be bigger numbers or it will be bigger numbers.
Through you, Chair, one of the other key points was the time and how some of the consultation went into people's tea time and nights. And we didn't have, as you may wish to talk, we didn't have high attendance levels during those latter times, so we might change what we do.
Through you, Chair. I mean, we ran our sessions, I think they were from like 3:30 to 6:30 or 7, and we kind of really found that after about 6 p.m. we didn't really get anybody new coming through the door in those evening sessions. So all of that kind of information we'll be working with our comms team next time we go around just to see whether there are some of those small tweaks we could make to make sure that it's...
But you're trying to cope. Saying that, let's not be too harsh on ourselves, because I did note that you kind of hit multiple locations.
Yes.
You might have been in one place at a certain time, but then you were like down the road, we were down the road at a different day at a slightly different time. So it tried to, I felt when you looked at the timetable, it tried to maximize every option for everyone, that they'd have a not too far traveling distance to go to some event and an online session as well, which is great.
Overall, I think you did a great job in the genuine listening. Yeah, it was really good. Well, the one I went to.
Okay, we have the recommendations on page 316 to receive the update. Thank you, Susan, and second, thank you, Alan. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, nay, that's carried. Our next agenda item is the land and water plan conflicts of interest. I understand Steve's going to speak to this. Steve, on behalf of council and the committee, just want to acknowledge your family bereavement and just pass on our sympathies to you and your whānau. And thanks for zooming into our meeting to talk about conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Chair. Can you move to the next one, please, Marie? This is an important paper now as we're starting to move deeper into the land and water planning process. It's important that we start to think about the conflicts of interest that might arise for both elected and appointed members under the Local Authorities Members Interest Act, which obviously applies and needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis and in regard to individual decisions as they come up. So the Act, there are two main rules. Firstly, the contracting rule, which really only applies if a member is entering into a contract with council, which doesn't apply in this particular case, which is obviously about a policy development process, which does get affected by the non-participation rule if there is a pecuniary interest there for the member concerned. The OAG, the Office of the Auditor General, is responsible for administering the Act, has powers to grant exemptions and declarations, as well as is the agency responsible for taking a prosecution should that be necessary. And prosecutions can result, it's quite an old piece of legislation passed in 1968 and indeed is in need of review, but we are stuck with the current legislation. And the key piece out of that is obviously the removal from office of an elected member rather than the fine itself if a member is found to be in breach of the Act. Thanks, Marie. So in terms of the non-participation rule, important to remember, it's not just the member themselves, but if your partner or spouse has ownership interests in a particular entity or a conflict of decision, then we also need to bear those. The pecuniary interest test is really a matter of would the way in which the decision or matter being considered is dealt with give rise to a potential gain or loss of money. So that can be both direct with things like a resource consent fees, and indeed one of the more recent prominent cases was where Environment Canterbury were considering the level of resource consent fees that they apply and how that's administered, and the OAG found that members who had resource consents, and there was 4 of them in that case, did actually have a pecuniary interest, even though some of the sums of money were relatively small, of less than $100, for example. Or it can also be more indirect, and for example, by authorising certain activities and many farming activities require or are permitted through a permitted activity rule in the plan or a controlled activity rule to undertake their farming activities, then that can obviously have an impact on the value of the property and the income it can generate, and does lead to an indirect pecuniary interest in those situations. Under section 6, which is the key definition or rule requiring it, there is an exemption if the pecuniary interest is held in common with the public. So an obvious example is things like the general rate that applies to every property that is clearly in common with the public. But a resource consent, for example, that where the level of the charge or cost involved may vary between different consent holders depending on the activity and the particular circumstances surrounding each property, that would be much harder to build an argument that it is an interest that is held in common with the public at large, and so would be more difficult to sustain that argument. And there's clear reference, and I've included a reference to the Eltham case in there about what does the objective bystander think about might be the interest here of the member involved. So that becomes the test that the Auditor General will look to apply in assessing each of these potential conflicts. Thanks, Marie. The rules do also apply to appointed members, and obviously we have a number of appointed members on this committee who have been and will continue to be directly involved in the policy development process and be making recommendations to council on the final plan changes and other steps we might take to better manage water quality across the region. There is, though, an exemption available because the legislation does contemplate that appointed members could be there representing particular interest groups, such as we have Federated Farmers representatives, and again, pretty reasonable to expect that a farmer's rep might own or have pecuniary interests in management of a farming operation. And the same again with iwi reps. Wouldn't be unexpected that iwi reps might have shares in multiply owned Maori land, for example, which again, particularly if that land is involved in primary production activities, is quite likely to generate pecuniary gains. So those one of the issues with the appointed members becomes, how do we apply that test around these interests in common with other members representing that interest? Is that an issue we disclose to the Auditor General and then leave for the Auditor General to decide whether that applies, or indeed does the member want to make that judgment themselves, as a question to be thought about. In terms of exemptions and declarations, which are the 2 key pieces, the ways in which the Auditor General can allow members to continue to participate, even if they do have a pecuniary interest, there are 2 key options here. The first one is the exemption, which is where the pecuniary interest is reasonably remote. And the obvious example, which is the rule that the Auditor General applied in the case of the Otago Regional Council policy plan making process in relation to the likes of Fonterra shares and farmlands and Ravensdown and those sorts of cooperative companies. They adopted the view that the members' interests were so remote or insignificant that they were unlikely to excuse me, lead to having an influence on the way in which the member might vote on a particular matter, so decided to grant an exemption in relation to those shareholdings of the Otago cases. And look, I would expect that they may well adopt a similar approach with some of our members in those scenarios. Or the second test is what's called a declaration, the second option, which is really about, say, where the Auditor General says, we acknowledge and understand that the member has a pecuniary interest in this matter, but actually on balance, it's important that the member be able to still participate despite that pecuniary interest. And again, the tests that they apply, and they are about, will it impede the transaction of the business of council? In some cases, you can end up with quite a few members being involved, conflicted, and therefore, if they had to stand aside, you end up with a relatively small group number of elected members being remaining to make the decision at hand. Now, that doesn't necessarily always affect quorum, but it could lead to quite a interesting situation where the small number of members left in making the decision. And then they also consider whether it's in the interests of members of the public to remain involved. So that's also becomes key parts of it, which the Auditor General's office will consider in determining whether to make a declaration. And in the Otago case, they did grant declarations to those councillors in the Otago case that did have farming interests, and so that they could continue to be involved in the plan development process. Thanks, Marie. So timing of application is a critical piece. To date, we have been largely just briefing you on the overall project management approach. The only real decisions we've made have been things like the freshwater management units. So they are very broad, high-level decisions that are reasonably easy to argue they are consistent with the interests of a very large proportion of ratepayers and citizens of the region. But we are now getting closer to where, towards the end of this year, we'll ask you to provide firmer direction and guidance on particular options that might be adopted affecting individual catchments. And so we move much more into the more definitive discussions. And it's at that stage in which we want to make sure we have a clear decision, either an exemption or a declaration, or everybody is clear that the member needs to stand aside because of their personal interests. So to do that, the Auditor General has written to us earlier this year, outlining their approach to Otago and effectively putting us on notice that this is an area we need to be mindful of as we proceed through the plan development process. And there is the option of declarations or exemptions, etc., that would still allow members to participate. And so we are proposing lodging an application on behalf of all those members that do wish to seek or clarify their position, and if necessary, seek an exemption or a declaration. Whether a member chooses to participate in that process is a decision that each of you individually needs to make. I cannot force you or require you to participate, but the responsibility does remain with you as an elected member to make the decision. My responsibility is to make you aware of the legal obligations you face and that are there. And if you do wish me to be involved in a joint application or exemption application, then very happy to support you in that process or provide you advice on the implications for you in your personal context. So to proceed through that process, we obviously need to have a bit of an understanding of the interests you hold, and also provide some commentary on the likely impacts that the plan making process might have on the interests you do hold. Obviously, some of those interests, and particularly in terms of councillors, are already in the public domain with the Register of Pecuniary Interests. So we can use some of that information, but there's obviously more information we need. In terms of appointed members, they are not required to meet those obligations under the Register of Pecuniary Interests. It applies under the Local Government Act, so we don't hold that information. So we'd need to work with you to get an understanding of the interests you might have, and the extent to which they might be in common with members of the group that you're there to represent. So that's the critical place. Thanks, Marie. So that's really where we're at. We're now, as I said, moving towards seeking a declaration and guidance from the OAG. Very happy to do that on behalf of individual members, and looking very happy again also to provide any individual advice that that may be helpful to move you through. So look, Madam Chair, very happy to take any questions, and Marie, if you want to take the slides down, that might make it easier for everybody to see. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Thanks for picking this up and making sure we go through a very thorough process and support us in declaring our conflicts as need be and making sure that we're above reproach in terms of signing off this plan. So does anyone have any questions or comments on this paper? Yeah, Donna.
I guess, so Steve, your recommendation is that we do go for an exemption?
Yeah, indeed. Certainly, given it's the safest approach, and certainly given the approach the OAG has adopted with Otago, I think it's reasonably high likelihood that the Auditor General will grant those exemptions and declarations, obviously for the two different types of interests, with the exemptions for shareholdings in some of the cooperative companies, the declaration for the substantive plan making process. So again, I think that should give a level of comfort that we can keep you safe and the organisation safe, because again, some of this can prejudice our plan making process if it does get challenged later on.
Great, I'm leading the Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I read this paper with great interest, and I was very pleased to see it there, and I would really certainly myself would like to act as above board as possible, and keep federated farmers and absolutely in the straight and narrow around this process. So thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I of course was 5 years a member of the Board of Fazans in Australia, and we spent half an hour normally before meetings going through all sorts of conflicts of interest, indeed historic papers that people have written, all kinds of different things. And in this day and age, it's far better to be safe than sorry, because what we don't want is that this process of setting up this new policy and a water plan goes ahead, and then somebody starts challenging it on the basis of some legal possibility that some member may have been considered to be in a conflict. If we go through this process and the Auditor General covers it, then it just protects the whole council from any sort of problem of that legal nature.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to provide that I may have an interest in. Just who should I forward them to? Should it be to my?
Whoever you feel comfortable. So Steve or Marie or Steve. Yeah, just send them straight to Steve.
I'm sorry.
Just send them to Steve.
Send them direct to me, Peter. Would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, Emily.
Just on that, what kind of things do we need to provide? Like, this is ownership of property, maybe employment.
Yeah, I think the best thing, if you've got any questions, is just have a conversation with Steve in the first instant, because then you can just go, what about this? What about that? And you can quickly go, yep, or no. I think that's probably easiest. Does that sound good?
Chair, what I'll also do is I'll email the appointed members a similar email to what I sent to council saying these are the things, here's an initial list of things that you might want to think about identifying. And then if you have any queries from me after that, then by all means come back and ask for guidance on those issues, and we're very happy to help guide that process.
We'll just go Benita and then Neil.
Kia ora, thank you, Madam Chair. I just did up a brief table, like Steve sent the info out to me. So what I was not cognizant of at the time was the shares in land that I haven't yet succeeded to of mums as well. So that's something else to be taken into consideration for those of us who have Māori land interests. But I'm happy just to share the table that I've set up, just to give you some context as to how you might try and organise that info.
Yep.
And just briefly, I've completed my exercise, and of course I haven't heard from anybody that there's a problem, but assuming it is, in a person in my case, I have situations where I own interests in things which then own interests in things which then own interests in things.
Yeah.
So it's most important, I think, to be sure that you go through all of this and give the council what you might say excess information rather than try to cover it. If you give them too much, no doubt they will refine it. So, you know, really make an effort to go into even secondary and tertiary situations to cover what you've actually been involved in.
Okay, sounds good. All right, we've got the recommendations on page 323, which is to receive this report, encourage us all to proactively identify and manage any conflicts, and agree that council staff support us and guide us in this process. So I'm happy to propose those. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Needham. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no, that's carried. And our final agenda item is the Parliamentary Commission of Environment report on land use change. So I will pass over to Finbar to introduce this item.
Chair, thank you very much. This is a report that was released by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment maybe a month or so ago now, and we thought we'd put it up to the council just as a noting paper. It is quite interesting and provides some food for thought for us across a range of matters. I'll just briefly summarise the key points from the report, and then I'm happy to take questions. And then I'll also just use this opportunity to just to flag with the committee a few other consultations that relate to similar matters that are open with the government at the moment. So the general thrust of the report is between climate change, biodiversity loss, and freshwater related land use change is a really important part of the toolbox in terms of addressing those issues. But it's hard to get right. And the report steps through a number of issues and then provides some comment on potential ways forward. Many of those are for central government to address, and obviously we have an advocacy role there to play, but there are also aspects where the regional council plays an important role. One of their key points is that right now the policy landscape is very fragmented across a range of things, and that creates some real risks. The PCE has been talking a lot about kind of mosaics of land use. So when you look at a map, a resilient regional community has a range of different land uses, operating in the same parcel even, rather than just big blocks of everyone doing the same type of land use. And they point out that the kind of fragmented approach that is currently taken. So for example, they use the example of the ETS quite a lot. The ETS is just kind of out there doing its own thing. It's not particularly well integrated with the likes of the RMA or other things. And because it's out there doing its own thing, they did some interesting modelling that shows the ETS, drives just like large-scale conversion to forestry in some rural communities, as opposed to taking a more nuanced approach where you end up with forestry, but a bunch of other stuff going on as well, which is better for the community. They highlight that surprisingly enough, a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work, and that it is really important to work at things at a regional level, and they focus very heavily on that catchment level, working with catchment communities and appropriate hapu and the like, being the kind of the scale that you really get traction on this stuff. And obviously that is a big opportunity for regional councils. And they do explicitly highlight that regional councils are the best place to support that kind of on-the-ground catchment scale work and monitor progress. They highlight an interesting one, is that they highlight the current regulatory system, which is very focused on that landowner level intervention, doesn't always achieve the type of outcomes that you want, because the nature as an individual landowner doesn't have good visibility over the full catchment. And they highlight there are opportunities to make that land kind of parcel scale intervention work better, particularly where market-based mechanisms can play a role. And I will see if the government takes this challenge on, but they do recommend exploring tradable water rights, and noting that that would require settling what I'm sure would be a challenging discussion around Māori ownership with freshwater and that kind of stuff. So we'll see if they take that recommendation on board. But then the other big part is just really hammering home the importance of that catchment level engagement and building catchment communities and the like as that tool to give individual landowners that visibility of those wider catchment issues, and also provide a bit of a broader support network for getting that kind of change. And there's a few other ones. I think the big one for an interesting one for us is the reducing barriers to land use change. And this is one where, as we're stepping through the land and freshwater plan process, is really top of mind of how do you design a regulatory framework at the regional level that obviously manages environmental risks appropriately, but also provides landowners the safe space, gives them confidence that they can try new land uses without worrying that they're going to get locked into something and can't go back to what they were doing before or what have you. And an important point and something that we're very aware of in the plan development is that there's a very big continuum of land use change. You know, it's not just a whole property switching to forestry. That's the one extreme. But there is also just changing management practices within a farm system, and you know, a landowner trying just a few little pockets of different land use change within their wider farming system, and it's really important to cater to that. Well, especially giving those people at the more management practice area, giving them the tools that they need. And then finally, I would just say they do talk about the New Zealand ETS, the emissions trading scheme, and how the current model for that is potentially a bit blunt, and they recommend, which will not go anywhere, they recommend that forestry be phased out of the ETS. And rather interesting that they propose instead that if the government was ever to develop a system of pricing methane emissions, that using forestry to offset methane emissions is actually far more appropriate, because the life cycle of methane in the atmosphere is shorter, and the PCE's objection to using forestry, especially exotic forestry in the ETS, is that you can't guarantee that land is going to remain suitable for exotic forestry over the life of carbon in the atmosphere, which is like thousands of years. So that was an interesting one. And then finally, just to note, as I mentioned, the government is also currently consulting on their emissions reduction plan and also a framework for carbon capture, utilisation and storage, which the former particularly relates to this kind of land use piece. But just to note, the consultation period for both those consultations shuts before the next policy and planning committee, and we are just looking at the moment at whether we want to do a submission, and if so, it'll have to be one of those ones that is circulated for email for your comment. But I just wanted to bring that to your awareness. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Well, so as Finbar said, this is for information discussion. Neil.
Just a few observations. Firstly, we should go to the end and talk about the climate change period document. I've suggested to Finbar here that there could be some people who are particularly interested in that particular thing, of which I am one. So we've agreed that maybe, we've talked about it, offline, we could have a special meeting, not a council meeting as such, but Finbar could lead people who are interested through this for about an hour. And if you wish to make your own submissions from that, it would be useful. It's something which maybe not something that most people are interested in, but there could be people, and I intend to look at that because I think that's important. Unfortunately, there are in the parliamentary commissioners report, once again, there's a whole lot of things in there that the government has no intention of doing, and the previous government had no intention of doing, and as such, they are already dead letters. It's interesting to note that there will be legislation, in fact, it's already in preparation, and in fact, it's mentioned in the second report, that the government plans to actually not allow ETS to be on class land 5 and below for new forestry plantings. And of course, this could be significant to Maori. I don't know, but maybe that's something you people over there are particularly interested in. So, and I noticed that the minister did say that in this particular consultation, Maori will play an important role to this aspect. So maybe it's something you might like to have a wee look at if it does affect anybody, although a lot of Maori land that's been given for these sort of purposes is often quite rough and maybe outside that classification. So I think it's a sad thing in some ways. We spend a lot of money in doing these reports, and we have a commissioner who obviously thinks about a lot of things, but it almost seems that they operate in a vacuum of which neither their ideas are run, their papers come up and their reports are made, and then another one is done, and that's it.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks for setting up with Finbar that opportunity for people to get together. And I'm sure if you're hooking Marie to make sure it's done in the correct fashion so we don't break any of our standing orders, that would be great. Any other comments, questions? Leland.
Thank you, Charlotte. Through you, I thank you so much for putting this paper in our papers. I'd been meaning to read it, and now I have. So that was great. And I was really interested in his comments around farm plans, because I would think there would be nothing worse than a farm plan where a farmer doesn't actually learn anything and doesn't actually come to any conclusions that allows them to understand the relationship they have with their land and the impact that their activities have on the environment in a way that actually evolves their consciousness. It would be a great way to a farm plan. And I thought that some of the suggestions he had in his paper around making farm plans better were really wonderful, and especially around having really great infrastructure so farmers could actually easily do them themselves, because there was the right amount of information available in order for them to engage properly. And I thought it was really encouraging, and it's really sad to hear that everyone thinks that it's just dead in the water, but I thought there was some stuff in there about farm plans that was really encouraging for me as a farmer anyway.
That's great too. Yeah, it's funny, the reports you always pick out interesting stuff, like on page 358 and 359, where there's the national picture of contaminants across the country. And Taranaki actually doesn't look too bad in some respects. And you can kind of see the national challenges as opposed to our challenges, which gives you that real context. So, yeah, thanks.
Through you, Chair, just quickly, while the central government will do what they like, there is plenty in here that we can take and inform our processes. Like the matters on farm plans, there's a lot for us to think about in terms of what our regulatory responsibilities might be under that system and how we write the catchment context challenges and values and the like. And so one thing I forgot to mention is the report. This is another thing that the PCE highlights very often is our environmental data as a country is really bad and is underinvested in. And that's another thing that as a regional council, we are already investing in under the current LTP, and we're lifting our game in that space. So that's another area that's within our control to a degree.
Any further questions, comments, Emily?
Yeah, you just reminded me. There was a comment in there about E. coli not being a very useful tool, which I found kind of interesting. I'm just curious if you had any comments on that.
Oh, it was just, sorry, through you, Chair. Was this in the PCE's report itself?
Yeah, sort of around the area with the map of contaminants around the country.
Right. Sorry, through you, Chair. I'm not familiar with that part of the report off the top of my head, but happy to have a look and have a chat about it.
So I was just having a quick scan.
Yeah, I was just surprised, but yeah, interesting.
It says accurately understanding concentrations of E. coli is difficult due to a combination of a relatively infrequent monthly monitoring and the fact that most is washed down rainfall in terms of heavy rainfall. Furthermore, to do with how it's sampled and the data that's collected in terms of accuracy. I don't know. Anyway, we can take that offline. Great. Any further questions, discussion? No, thanks for bringing the report to Finbar. It's really useful to see these kind of more forward-looking conversations, because I think they're going to catch up with us quite quickly. That and managed retreat from climate change, I think, is another one that's going to be a very difficult policy issue that government's going to have to wrap their head around as well. So we have the recommendations on page 337 to receive this report and note it. And do I have a proposer? Thanks, Neil, and a seconder. Thanks, Celine. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
And to the contrary, nay. That's carried. Excellent. That brings us to the end of our meeting. So if we go to our closing calculation.
Madam Chair.
Oh, yeah.
Given that we are relatively early, and also given the advent of the Māori wards and constituencies bill, I wonder if I might make an observation, Madam Chair, at this committee. Very brief.
Noting it's not on the agenda, but in the absence, as you say, we do have some time, so you can have a short, say 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And forgive me, Benita, for not discussing this with you first. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we stand at a pivotal moment in our journey towards equity, representation, and justice. The establishment of Māori wards in Taranaki marked a significant milestone in local body representation. It was a beacon of hope, a recognition of the need for Māori voices at the decision-making table. Yet today, with the advent of the bill, we face the looming possibility of these hard-won Māori wards being revoked after one 3-year term. The decision hangs in the balance. Responsibility for retaining Māori wards now rests with the wider community. After all our hard work to get to this table, we now face the possibility of once again being denied. And let's be clear, it's not for Māori to judge the merits of our participation at this table. It's for the council and the community to decide. As I said, this is a pivotal moment. This is the moment the community would judge the value of Māori wards. And it's also the moment history will judge the community. We wish you well in your deliberations, and the ball is now in your court. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, as you note, we'll have those council decisions coming our way, and the council will consider our next steps once the bill is finalised. But I also note us as a council, along with all the Taranaki council, signed the Local Government New Zealand letter and did submission. Thank you. Benita.
Kia ora te mea tūtahi ka tuku tēnei mihi kia koe Peter o whakaaro rangatira. Kia ora. Team, I just in reflection of the report around TRC's improvement in terms of Māori relations, and also in our previous the Ops and Regs meeting where I asked about staff engagement with Ngāti Tāwhirikura Hapu around the embankment remediation, etc. And coming back to Celine's earlier point a bit about not having enough information sometimes to be able to formulate good reporting back to whoever we need to report to, I think it's a lost opportunity that our council keeps using whatever the terminology is around Māori engagement, and that these questions that we keep having to ask, have you involved iwi, have you involved hapu, there's some real gold in some of the responses that are coming from staff around, yes, well, actually, we've done this and we've done this and we've done this. Surely in our reporting to council meetings, there's the opportunity for some of that engagement to be more clearly defined and enhanced in the reports, rather than the obligatory, the work we do provides opportunity for Māori engagement, etc. To me, that's giving us the opportunity to be more responsive to the questions that are being asked of our communities around Māori engagement. It's more transparent about the type of engagement that goes on. It's more accountable back to iwi and hapu, that they can see that the staff are doing this kind of work. So can we not please consider being more, I'm losing my words, being more
proactive, detailed.
You mean comprehensive about exactly the work that is going on, which is good stuff. So that's all I'm asking.
Just clarify, you mean the iwi consideration section in the report?
Yes, because it's always the standard paragraph that to me doesn't actually articulate what work is being done. Or if that paragraph has to be there, then can we also articulate what work is being done afterwards? Because I think it's a lot of opportunity to be accountable to our people, to be accountable to the community, and for the staff to be able to highlight the good work that's being done. So that's just my little soapbox.
Okay, we'll pass on that feedback to staff in terms of reports, that there are some great examples, as you said, in the papers where we can urge officers to put those things in, if that's possible. Great.
Madam Chairman, Donna had an issue that she wanted discussed with the bulk of the last meeting that was passed in block with the pest management plan. She wanted to talk about, and we do have time on our hands. Is it appropriate to go back to that?
It's just a quick one.
So this is about the pest management plan paper that we
Just
discussed.
more, where does DOC come into this? You know, because if they're not doing their bit, it's pretty hard for everyone else to do their bit, isn't it?
Okay, without the risk of this becoming a free-for-all and everybody raising everything in the sun, we'll talk about DOC and then we'll move to the closing category. We don't have Dan or any of the officers relevant to it here, so
DOC are a key player.
Yeah.
And how hard they play is a function of our success as well, and we have the Mongo here as a classic example. So we're actively engaged with them to make sure they're playing their part.
But you know, the 1080 drop has been well and true. I think is it happening now? I think they've done the pre-feed now, but gosh, are we on to 5 years?
So through many decades, we've had these same discussions with DOC and the like, but we're doing our very best.
But
and
there's
with
some
Neil's
killing letters going out to landowners.
yeah. And with Neil's urging, we have written to the Ministry of Conservation to invite him to the region to come visit what we're doing. So while we raise things at official level and things like that, that's also a good avenue if we can get him there.
Perhaps this matter, or rather the relationship thing, could be included in the next report on predator free and so forth, which is coming up, and staff just note that that's a matter which people will be wanting to talk about.
Okay, could we take note of that action? Got that?
Could we just come back to that, please?
I'll go.
Yeah.
Fred's got it?
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
Fred. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, ops and regulatory, the next credits free 2050. Yeah. Great. Okay. Thank you. Right, we'll move to the closing karakia. Kia uru mai. Kia uru mai. Aho ora. Aho kaha. Of mai. Kiranga. Kiraro. Kiroto. Kiwaho. Rere. Paimari. And we'll just do the karakia for Kai. No mai enahu. O te wā. O te nakina. O te waita. O te wāmari. Nā tāne. Nā ronga. Nā tāna. Nā maru. Orangi anu atu I wane, ko papatu anu ku atakato akine. Tutuhu iti wakama kia tina, uye, tai. Great. Thanks for everyone's contributions today, and great to see everyone around the table. Let's go have some shared pie. I did.